Today is November the 9th, 2015. My name is Tanya Finchum.
Hello, Connie.
Along with Alex Bishop.
Yeah.
And we're with Oklahoma State University. Today we are in Bartlesville, Oklahoma to speak with Lou Barrier. And this is part of our Oklahoma 100-Year Life. So thank you for having us.
Hooray.
Did I pronounce your name right?
Bearer, yeah.
Bearer.
It's close enough. Well, up where my folks come from, it was beer. I drink beer.
And where did they come from?
Pennsylvania.
Pennsylvania. Okay, let's start with having you tell us when and where you were born.
I was born 1915, August the 29th, in Trafford, T-R-A-F-F-O-R-D, Trafford, Pennsylvania, Westmoreland County.
And what did your parents do for a living?
My dad worked for the Pennsylvania Railroad. My mother was a homemaker, a good one.
Did you have brothers and sisters?
I had quite a number. One sister and I guess 3 brothers. Is that right? Robert,
Yep.
Ralph, and Paul, yeah.
And what was the sister's name, since we're naming?
Dora, D-O-R-A, Dora.
And where were you in the lineup?
Where was I? Let's see. Cubby, my eldest brother, then Ralph, who deceased at an early age, then I, so I was number 3.
Okay.
And then Paul, and then finally Dora.
Are you the first one to make it to 100?
I'm the only one.
Yep.
That answer the question?
Have you any idea why that might be?
What?
Your secret.
Yeah. Do you really want to hear it?
Sure.
Wine, women, and song. And mastication.
Mastication.
In that order?
I think so, in that order. Wine, women, and song. Yeah, I think so. But the mastication thing is really chewing my food. Because I was taught at an early age in public school, we had no parochial school, to chew 21 times every bite. So I've practiced that unconsciously because I get more nourishment from the food. It tastes better. I don't eat as much, and it takes time so that we at the dinner table can have a lot of time for talk. That's what the meal should be. Enjoying each other. You can't enjoy them where you're chewing your food and making noise. Okay?
Okay. Well, song, does that mean you sing?
We sang a lot. I sang a lot. We organized, 3 of us, 4 of us, organized a 4 people
Quartet?
in high school. We got a teacher to help us and do a little training. So we became I think a pretty good quartet, which led us into performing quite a bit on the stage, which then led, I guess, to minstrel shows, where I was blackface along with my good friends, Negroes, black people. They dolled up like we did. And from that, I was led into the Glee Club at the University of Pittsburgh, which I thoroughly enjoyed. Had become an officer in that club. And it's strange because I think about it in the 4th grade, the teacher, public school, patrolling while singing class, she came up behind me and said, "Lewis, you're not singing." And from that day on, I no longer was afraid to sing. I had a voice. It was fear of singing up to that time.
Well, did you have a favorite song?
Not then, but I have a favorite song now, Neil Diamond's Caroline.
Oh, you want to sing a little bit of it for us?
I know I don't know it that well.
No, well. It's Sweet Caroline, isn't it?
Sweet Caroline, yeah.
Being from North Carolina, I like it too.
Well, it happens that my physical therapist has the name Caroline. That's why that song has come back in my memory, because of her personal efforts on my carcass, and because I like Neil Diamond. He's my favorite singer. Is he still living?
I don't know, is he?
Yes. Yes.
He is?
Yes.
Yeah.
I thought it might be Elvis.
Well, no, he's a young man, as far as I'm concerned.
Well, where did you go to elementary school?
Where?
Uh-huh.
No, there was no elementary school in our system. First, we went to the first grade. I chose the name of the teacher to attend her class, Miss Lewis. Her last name, Lewis. You can see the connection. But it happened, my daddy was a long-time member of the school board, and so he had an opening to get me in the class that was good for me, that he thought that I wanted to attend. Miss Lewis was my first grade teacher. Son of a gun.
What was the name of the school?
Trafford Elementary School, I guess.
And then high school?
Same thing.
What year did you graduate?
Oh, gee, many.
1930 something?
Yeah, 1930.
33.
I graduated from Pitt
33.
in 33. Thank you,
1933.
somebody.
May 26th, I have his diploma.
Oh, there you are. 19 what? 26?
33.
33. That fits. I guess the diploma's right.
Did you have a favorite subject?
Not particularly. I had some I didn't like. Mostly because it was too much routine. And also I didn't do well in them. That was history. That's when I got my first and only D. And that set me straight, because I hadn't studied history. So I hit the books. And I guess I got out of that course with a B, maybe an A, but I made the grade. That was in junior high, I think.
Well, did you work any while you were in high school?
Work for pay, no. Work around the house, yes. For pay, no. I had 3 meals a day and a bed.
And what did you call those meals? Breakfast and what was the noon meal?
That's a good question. I don't know if we did. Now it's lunch, but I don't know if we gave it anything. The evening meal was supper.
Supper, okay.
My dad worked a night shift all his life. So supper was the big meal when Dad could attend the meal with us. And it was one of conversation. I didn't have much to say, but somebody there did. I guess it was Dad and the other brothers.
What was your favorite thing your mother made?
Her favorite, and I think it became our favorite, was angel food cake. And she would break the eggs by hand, make the separation by hand, no mechanical equipment, and I guess a dozen egg whites, or maybe 24 egg whites, beat them by hand until they fluffed up and became solid. You have to admire a woman who would put that much energy into baking a cake for the family. But it became one, I think, every week. We had chickens, so we got the eggs from them.
You lived on a farm then?
No, we lived in town, in Trafford. Had a chicken coop at the back in those days. I collected the eggs on occasion. Great learning experience. There was one rooster there that didn't like intruders, and I was an intruder. But he loved my younger brother Paul. They became companions. That rooster would do everything that brother Paul told him to do, but he would chase me, and I didn't like him.
Did he have a name?
I don't think he had a name for him, but I don't remember any name.
Well, would some of the chickens end up on the plate?
Indeed they did. I think we had chicken every weekend. Sunday was the big meal. I remember Dad chopping the head off in the yard. Dad had come from the farm. A hatchet we used around the house. He took the hatchet, placed the chicken's neck over a block of wood, and wham, and then throw the chicken out, and the chicken in its death spasms would jump all over the yard. It was a sight. Excuse me. I long remember, didn't understand why that chicken died that way. Anybody here have an answer to that question? I guess
How they die.
it would dance or growl or prowl or whatever, throw itself around for about 5 minutes until it was exhausted. I often wonder what happened to the head. I guess it went into the rubbish pile.
Well, would she fry it or bake it?
Predominantly baked. It was an experience. The chicken would be doused in boiling water, the dead carcass, in boiling water. What's that for, Mom? That's to loosen the feathers. So then she would sit down at the table and we would help a little bit and pluck the feathers out of the dead carcass. And then we had natural gas fuel there. On the farm they had coal and wood. Excuse me. The pin feathers, I think that's what they called it, would be scorched off by passing the denuded chicken carcass over the flame to burn off those little pin feathers. That was quite an experience. The mother did that.
It probably didn't smell too good, did it?
I don't remember.
Don't remember.
No smell.
Well,
It was part of life.
sure.
So you accept those smells.
Did she have a large garden?
A large garden. Well, large, I don't know, but a garden in which Mother and Dad, to a certain extent, what she could get us kids to do would grow string beans and corn and tomatoes and strawberries, and I don't think we grew potatoes. Those were too easy to get from the store, I guess. But all kinds of vegetables. I'm a vegetable man, although I like meat. But the liking for vegetables came because that's what we had every meal. Fresh vegetables cooked by Mom, plucked out of the garden. And if it was winter, it came out of the jar because the food, the surplus from the garden, was canned by Mom and put into glass jars, mason jars, and preserved in the cellar where it wouldn't freeze. So we would have that kind of food through the winter. We had vegetables in winter.
She planned ahead.
You bet, you bet.
Well, did she make your clothes? Did she sew?
She sewed, but she didn't make clothes, but she mended clothes, and she altered their size to keep up with growth, I guess. But no, we bought clothes, and I don't have much memory of the clothing we bought until I got older, when I was old enough to wear a suit. I guess that was entering maybe junior high.
Had hand-me-downs.
Oh, a lot of hand-me-downs. As long as they would last.
Well, when you finished high school, what did you do?
Well, I spent the summer at Boy Scout camp, but went then to the university, University of Pittsburgh. I had a half scholarship. I don't know how that happened, but I guess my grades were good enough to get it. So a half scholarship, and tuition per semester was $300. So Dad had to come up with $150 twice a year. How he did that, I don't know.
Were you the first one to go?
No, all of us made the university. Everyone graduated from the university. I don't know how my parents did it, because, well, I guess he saved his money. I never thought the job would pay that much, because a lot of it was spent rearing the family to begin with. We had one house change that I remember. Moved from 6th Street to Fairmont Avenue. Both of these houses were brick. 6th Street was yellow. The house on Fairmont Avenue was red brick. And the house on Fairmont, which I remember most, had only 2 bedrooms, really 2 bedrooms, and a tiny little room which, as occasions came, I would occupy. We had an attic, so Paul lived in the attic. He became a radio man, and then used that when he graduated from the University of Pittsburgh to take a position with Bell Telephone Labs, where he spent his career.
Well, what was your major?
Chemical engineering. Chemical engineering is derived from mechanical, because it is taking machinery, pipes and pumps, centrifuges, and the rest of it, and putting a chemical process through them to make that chemical process continuous rather than in a single reactor, which is what they had done up till, I guess, that time.
That was in the 30s?
Yeah.
Mid-30s?
Yeah. I graduated in 1937.
Well, let's back up a little bit. Do you remember much about the Depression years?
I remember a lot about the Depression years, because I had the good fortune yesterday just to pass some of those memories on to one of my grandsons, who had to write a paper in his school on the Depression. I knew more than he was able to take down. Yes, I remember a lot about the Depression, because at the Depression, and when it started in the East, among the manufacturing establishments, and Westinghouse, which was the primary company in our town, couldn't keep up with the payroll, and they would dismiss people, and there was a lot of unemployment. But there was no government aid. And I must say, no government aid. Those were the good old days. Government aid is a mistake. It makes people dependent on somebody else, whereas they should grow up, be trained, live self-sufficient, which is really the American scheme. Excuse the word scheme, the American plan. Anyway, the Depression. People would come to our house, as they did to many houses. They were in need of clothing and of food, and they got handouts, whatever we had. And tramps would come to the back door. They would eat on the porch. cold winter days, they would come in and eat in the kitchen. Mother would always serve the bums, the tramps, something. We got acquainted a little bit with them, not by name, but by the fact that there were unfortunate people in the world who needed help. But on the Depression in particular, people would come to our house and somehow or other, now Dad was working night turn. I think he started at midnight, which meant he had to leave the house at about 11. So up to that time, in addition to all the other things he did in charity work, he would receive the unfortunate people who needed help. Now, we didn't have the help, but people were contributing, and I guess there was a source from the city to distribute food and clothing. Hand-downs, yes, everything. So Dad somehow or other was taking these folks' names and writing up something about them so that they could be given a ticket and go wherever it was to get the food. One incident I remember in particular, I would help to the extent I could before I went to bed and before Dad had to go to work. When a gentleman, excuse me, I do him great credit, when a man came up and I greeted him, welcomed me into the house, and he said, "I'm here because the world owes me a living and I'm here to collect." He needed a handout, so I had to usher him into Dad's, where he was working, I guess in the living room or someplace. And I don't know what happened in there, but about 2 days later, somebody took a pot shot at my father in front of the Buick dealership in town. Missed him, but I suspect it was this bird who probably had been denied a handout because the world owed him a living, but not the bearers. The Depression. I remember people, during the Depression, I went into college, into the university. We traveled, all five of us, got to the University of Pittsburgh by rail. Dad worked on the Pennsylvania Railroad. He got a pass, free transportation for the family. So that's how I got through the university, through transportation provided by the Pennsylvania Railroad, because my dad was an employee. I presume they did this for everybody. It was a ride of about 15 or 20 miles from Trafford to Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, where we disembarked from the train at a station called Shady Side, just outside of the Pittsburgh Union Station. So we walked there. That was probably a 2 or 3 mile walk into the university. We did it twice a day. Sometimes we ran there to catch the train, and every morning at Trafford we ran down the hill to catch the train because we were always late. The train would pull out slowly because the engineer knew they had a bunch of college kids running late, and we'd hop the moving train. He would toot the whistle a little to give us some extra speed. At nighttime, coming back from the university, always late, always at night, I would fall asleep. The conductor, fortunately, would wake me, and I would wake up, get off the train, and walk a mile back up the hill, this time up to our house. Now that was the use of the train. For 4 years, that was my life. Let's see. We started talking about the Depression. Oh, in Pittsburgh, many a time I saw an unemployed person, I guess, standing on the corner selling apples to make some money, or getting handouts. But nevertheless, that situation never affected my family to the point where we ever were hungry, or where we ever didn't have some clothing and an overcoat or warm clothing to wear in the winter time. But I do remember on those walks of a mile or so, whatever, to the station and a mile down in Pittsburgh, of walking through the slush, which is the reason I decided I couldn't stand the Pittsburgh weather, but walking through slush, wet shoes, cold weather, sitting all day. I don't know why I lived with wet shoes. They would drive out in class, and we would do the thing all over again and put on wet shoes in the morning. What a life. Talk about sustenance. Let's see. Oh, the University of Pittsburgh at that time was still in the act of building what then became a skyscraper. I think one of the few skyscraper colleges, universities in the country, and that became known as the Cathedral of Learning. A very special building, built as a Gothic church would have been, but high, with proper stone carvings inside and out, in a big room which was in the first floor called the Commons Room. And around the Commons Room were a series of rooms called the Empire. I'll call them Empire Rooms. I'll think of it. Equipped, decorated, set up by various nationalities in Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh was full of different nationalities, many of them Catholic. And they would equip these houses, they called them nationality rooms. So every nationality that wanted to and could equip such a room had the opportunity to build a room. The room was supplied at university expense. They paid for the rest to honor their nationality and their people who lived in Pittsburgh. I think that was a great thing to do. The university, in building the cathedral, it was underway when I was there, so we were going to school in an unfinished building. The elevators ran, but the rooms were not finished. They were just stone walls, concrete stone block, no hardware much on the doors, no woodwork, still under construction. What a great time to go to school, because you can remember those things, but in a school where everything is done for you by somebody else ahead of you, you don't have these kind of memories.
So when you graduated from there in 1937, and then what did you do?
Oh, I got a job with the Westinghouse Company in a department which was given the name of the product they were producing, laminated plastics of the old style, formaldehyde, heat-setting resin. So predominantly made in sheets and cut up to fit a particular thing. My job was in the lab at first, then the cutback came, and I was offered a chance to go to the office and do cost accounting work. The great production at that time, I didn't realize it, although I knew what was going on, was making pulleys. This was out of thermoplastic. The blanks would be made in molds with ball bearings, and then the groove and the pulley would be cut on machinery by the machinists on the floor. But these were aircraft pulleys for the control cables. Enormous quantities of those were being produced. And I didn't realize that we were getting equipped for the war. Now this was in 37, I graduated 37, and left there in 40. When I asked for active, I was a reserve officer in the Coast Artillery, so I asked for active duty in 1940, partly because I was disappointed with my career in the office, and I wanted to do something else. And I knew that there was going to be a war, so I asked for active duty. The reason I knew there was going to be a war, because FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, president, said, "I hate war." And I knew we were going to be in war. He hated war, but we were making all kinds of plans for it. How is this possible? He lied. I don't know what he would have said, but he lied. I've always held that and numerous other lies against him and others of like ilk.
Well, in active duty, what did you do?
I'm a conservative, if you don't sense it. What? I beg your pardon.
Said you were active duty, what did you have to do?
Oh, yeah, let's see. In 1940, I applied for active duty and received orders to go to, barracks near Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. Carlisle Barracks, named after Indians, I think, Carlisle, and took my basic work there. Now, it's not basic as an infantryman because I was already given the title of officer, but just to get organized, to bring the troops together. So, and I think a mustering point for further assignments. So, from Carlisle Barracks, I was sent to Detroit because I was, although in the Coast Artillery was closed down because that was to prevent an invasion, but I became a part of the Air Corps. Note, Air Corps, not Air Force. Air Corps, Army Air Corps. And so I was sent to Detroit and in what they called the Materiel Command to make the parts of airplanes, not by us, but by contractors. So I became a part of the military staff, sort of supervising the contractor at work on his contracts for the government to see that they were doing a proper job, bad as it was. From Detroit, shall I go on?
Sure.
From Detroit, in due time, because that also was mustering point. Sorry. Anyway, where was I? Oh, that
You were in Detroit.
from Detroit, I was sent down to Fort Worth in Texas. A Yankee going down to Rebel Land. A Republican going down to Democrat land in Texas. And so I was given the assignment of a property officer for all the material that was being shipped into the consolidated Vultee plant, who were putting together B-24s, presumably to assemble parts which were made by Ford Motor Company in Michigan and shipped down to Fort Worth for final assembly into an airplane. So my job, this is stupid and unreal, my job as property officer, and all property officers at that time are in this situation, had personal accountability for all the supplies that came in. We were personally responsible. We had to account for them. Isn't that stupid? There were millions of dollars of material coming in, and I was responsible. I didn't have that much money. Anyway, that was the job. So I went from there because of a slight encounter with the commanding officer. I said something to him one time that he thought was improper, I guess. I'll have you transferred. And so he did. So there's an intervening action in there I'll come back to. So in 1 week, we found ourselves in Cheyenne, Wyoming, as far away from Detroit, the headquarters, as they could get us. In the meantime, while in Fort Worth, one of the contractors to build the plant, the construction of the plant, not the operation of the plant, was a contractor in which a beautiful girl, worked. And through the glass partitions, I had an office there, I saw a gorgeous head of black hair from the back. And I said, "Who has that beautiful hair?" Am I getting off base?
No, you're good.
So I arranged to find out who she was. And this encounter, not her encounter, but with her boss, occurred in the restroom. Where else but in a restroom? Who is that person? And he gave me her name, Priscilla Boyd, B-O-Y-D. And I said, "Do you think I could have a date with her?" He said, "Well, I'll talk to her and see if it's okay." Imagine. They knew I was a Yankee. They knew I was a Republican. They were Democrats, white folk. And so we met each other, and our first date was December the 20th of 19 Pearl Harbor month.
41.
How much?
41.
41, okay. So her name was Priscilla. She was to become my wife. I didn't know this, but somebody was doing the directing of this episode. So we went to a dance to celebrate December the 20th, after Pearl Harbor, put on by the JCs when they used to have Junior Chamber of Commerce. So I bought a ticket and invited her as our first date to go to this dance. Well, I'm not much of a dancer, so after a dance or two, she loved it, and I didn't do her well. But I said, "Let's go have a Coke or something in the cafe." So we went into the cafeteria and sat the rest of the dance, the rest of the evening, just drinking a Coke and shooting the bull, talking, because there was a lot to discuss. We were getting acquainted, and I think the Holy Spirit was doing some work, because in 6 months later, we were married. In 6 months, she had become a Catholic. I hope this doesn't offend anybody, but she was a graduate of Texas Christian University in Fort Worth. And she told me, because I asked her why did she become a Catholic, and she said, "I took every religious course, every theological course that the university offered, and I had questions and I wasn't getting answers." And I said to her, maybe I can help that out. So I took her to St. Patrick's Cathedral. She was a Baptist. I was a Catholic. And I introduced her, for reasons I don't know, to the priest with whom I had become acquainted. Now, I was a stranger, but I don't know why and how I became acquainted with 4 or 5 or 6 priests in this church. I had dinner with them at their invitation in the rectory. Who could be so lucky? So I said, "Let me introduce you to the priests, and they'll answer your question." There was a Father Langenhorst present, who was an intellectual, properly suited for her, from Belgium, perfect English. She met up with him, and he gave her instructions in the faith. And in 6 months after December the 20th, on on June the 6th, we were married. That's a fast moving. The war's on. But my folks, mother and dad, came down from Pennsylvania, Pittsburgh, to Fort Worth to attend this wedding. They came by rail, of course. They couldn't get an airplane. And there were no seats available. So they stood the whole time in the aisle. They were civilians. The GIs had all the seats. Nobody, to my knowledge, offered them a chair. I think it was probably the other way around. They offered their seats to the GIs. I don't know that. Anyway, they attended this wedding. We, on June the 6th, we had, I think, a weekend pass, military pass, so we went to San Antonio for what we would call a honeymoon of a weekend, which was quite enough because I was still in the military. And we came back, and it was shortly thereafter that the commanding officer was too busy to attend the wedding, which is okay. They had a lot of things to do. But within 1 week of the wedding, I found myself with my bride in Cheyenne, Wyoming, in a new job, a new command, and everything. And then, so I spent the war as contracting officer in Cheyenne, Wyoming, at a small plant run by United Airlines then. I don't think United exists today, in what they called a modification center. Modification centers were those establishments established by the Air Corps to make last-minute changes in certain aircraft to fit them for a particular mission someplace. All secret. Nobody talked about the work they were doing. The plans were confidential. I didn't know what they were doing. My job as contracting officer was to approve the payments if they were justified. It was a grand experience. United Airlines was a good contractor. They knew what their job was, and they did their job without too much unwarranted expenditures. Anyway, I spent the major part of the war there, and then as the war was winding down and the government knew that it was winding down, they made it possible, for reasons of their plans, to offer scholarships for selected people to go to university for advanced degrees in certain engineering professions for which they saw a need in the future. And I chose ceramic engineering. So I was sent to the University of Illinois along with Priscilla, no kids yet, at a government expense. We drove my little old Chevrolet. I spent a year at the University of Illinois in a new field, ceramic engineering, got a master's degree, graduated, and was sent there to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Dayton, Ohio. But the war was obviously winding down and was concluding. They had surplus officers. They were anxious to get rid of all they could, so I asked for termination and was granted my departure. So then I was in the field looking for a job. We went to Trafford, Pennsylvania, and lived with my folks for months until I found a job. We wrote, I guess Priscilla must have typed 40 or 50 letters of application, and I got a whole series of job interviews, a couple of, I guess, offers. Couldn't make up my mind because I was applying now as a ceramic engineer. But one from Phillips Petroleum Company in Bartlesville, Oklahoma. Who ever heard of it? Because, how this happened. My commanding officer in Cheyenne, Wyoming, had come from Tulsa, knew about Phillips Petroleum Company. And he said, when we're done with this mess, if you're looking for a job, let me see if I can get you a connection with Phillips. And I said, I don't want to work for a magnesia company. That's what I knew. And he told me, he got me straightened out. So Phillips was high on the list for a couple reasons. On my letter of application to them, as it was forwarded through the company, they sent me copies of their forwarding letters, which I thought was darn nice, to the various departments that might be interested in this bird. And so I had a job and didn't know it. But we finally decided that we had to leave Trafford, my folks, and get on the road and pick up some interviews on the way and make a decision to go to join one. Phillips had already submitted an offer. So en route, in the middle of, near the end of December, snow on the ground, colder than Hades, we made up our minds to accept the offer from Phillips Petroleum Company. This was about, I guess, the 30th of December. The date is a little important. The 30th of December. I sent them a telegram and said, I'm going to arrive down there on the 31st or the 1st of January. I would like to accept the job offer. So we showed up, and I resided in the Burlingame Hotel, which is now an office building for Phillips. No, for the city. The city finally bought, this is a long developing thing. They bought the building, which is the headquarters for the city. At that time, it was a hotel named the Burlingame Hotel. So I own a room in that because we stayed there 1 month while we sought lodging elsewhere. There wasn't anything in town because this was still boom territory. Let's see. We stayed in the Burlingame for a month, found an apartment someplace. Eventually we bought a house under, I guess, the GI Bill, a house for about $7,500 in what was known as the Phillips Addition, because Phillips built a lot of houses and got them sold to new recruits because they were looking for manpower too. They were booming, which is why I got a job. My job was working on a device which we named the Pebble Heater. It's a heat exchanger in which pebbles in an upper chamber would be heated by combustion of fuel and go through a narrow neck into a bottom chamber, which became a reactor into which we emitted hydrocarbon gas for thermocracking. This was to compete against cracking in stainless steel tubing. Unfortunately, we couldn't solve two problems. The pebbles would fracture, which is why I was there. They were ceramic pebbles, about being half-inch or so. They would fracture because that became a terrible thermal shock and being exposed to cold hydrocarbon gases. But we weren't advanced far enough to examine the fundamentals of what was the nature of the action of the thermal shock and the kind of material that would sustain it. We weren't that advanced. So the second reason that process didn't work is because we could not solve the problem of carbon buildup where the gas first met the hot pebbles, it was decomposed instantly, which left carbon. The carbon laid down and restricted the flow of the pebbles. The stainless steel tubing won out. It is the way to go. Ceramic engineering couldn't solve the problem. Now, where was I?
You're doing fine. You just bought a house for $7,500.
Oh yeah, 75, and yeah, and we had our first child, not in that house. I was born at home. All kids in my days was born at home. In those days, we were born in the only hospital we had then. Not we. Bob was born, our eldest, by Dr. I've forgotten his name. He delivered he delivered the first and the last. I really mean the last of 5.
You were pretty busy with 5.
I was pretty busy. What?
With 5.
Try it. It's worth it. I've got 5 great kids. I used this expression before. This is a happy home. I think Abby gave it this name because when this crowd gathers, there's nothing but talk, 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 talk. Everybody's jabbering. There was a time when I could understand and hear them and participate, but it's just talk, 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 talk now. It's a happy home. 5 kids, plus spouses, plus kids.
And what were their names?
Oh, Bob, Robert, and Jiminy. Don't help me, don't help me. Oh, there she is. Annabeth. And Elizabeth, actually, but contracted by her will to Annabeth, which is okay. Then, yep. What is your name? And then,
Put him on the spot, didn't you?
Yeah.
and then Susie,
Yeah,
and then Thomas.
Thomas.
I know all those names, but I have difficulty making quick recall. 5 kids, 3 boys, 2 girls. What a motley crew.
So we're missing one. Bob, Annabeth, Susie,
Michael,
Michael. Okay, Michael.
Susan, and
Yeah.
then Thomas.
Okay. Well, did you stay with Phillips the rest of your career?
No. When I was 55, because the company program for employees allowed graduation or departure at age 55 with whatever you'd earned in retirement program to leave the company. They made the decision for me. I was terminated. This was one of those times that the oil companies cut back 10%. It's going on right now for economic reasons. They have to slash the employment people. So I left the company and went out in business for myself, selling, of all things, high-grade linens, precious linens. But the market for linens had gone. Nobody wants to iron a linen garment or linen tablecloth anymore, for which they have paid $4,000 or $5,000. They just don't make that investment. So the company went broke, and I went into another business in motivation, selling motivation plans, and that was exciting, worthwhile, but not profitable. And so I finally decided, darn it, I'm going to quit this thing, this business, and go sell real estate, because I always had an attraction as an engineer in building houses, and we built this one. And so I went into the real estate business, not of building them, but of selling them as a real estate agent, and learned the game and became halfway decent income, and raised the family from that until I got too old after 25 or 35 years of real estate business, and sold the company and got out of it and retired on my vast retirement program from the Phillips Petroleum Company, which is negligible. I had not been with Phillips long enough at a high enough salary to make a retirement program really worthwhile. So it's small. So our income came from whatever I was able to earn in real estate, and whatever Priscilla was able to earn as a teacher, a first grade teacher, a first rate teacher, teaching English. She taught English in a different way. Many times the outstanding kids sat in our den and she was teaching them then. They thought English. She was teaching them life support, how to live, the ethics of life, because a lot of the kids around here didn't have that at home. They got it from my dear wife.
Well, did you ever meet the president or CEO of Phillips?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Let me tell you an experience. Which one of many? Well, one. After I left Phillips and was trying to earn a living on my own on a blustery day in the fall, I was downtown and wanted to see what was going on in the stock market. So I went into the stock market and looked at the board, and somebody behind me started to part my hair. I had long hair then and didn't wear a cap, so the hair had become windblown. And somebody behind me stepped up and began to fix my hair. And I said, "What's going on here?" It gave me the willies. And I turned around, it was Boots Adams, the head man for Phillips Petroleum Company. He goes. Well, since then, for reasons I don't know, I didn't have dinner at their house, but that'll be another story. I did visit their house up north of town, very beautiful home on acreage. They were raising cattle, and didn't meet him, but got together with his two kids, Steve and Kenneth. Now, the reason I was there was because I was in some kind of an association with Kiwanis, which these kids were participating in. So we were up there for a meeting with his two kids, which now leads me to why probably some of this happened. At the Kiwanis Club, we had the opportunity to have students from the school visit us as guests. I think we had one or two a week, if we could get them, and they would visit. Well, the Adams kids had many invitations, were there frequently because of their position, but also they were darn fine kids. So one time I was asked to introduce Kenneth Adams, who still is here. Still get Christmas cards from him. One time I was asked to introduce Kenneth Adams, and I said, "Oh, shucks, he's been here 1,000 times. He's already known. Why does he need to be introduced? What am I going to say?" So I sat in the den in there and looked up over just happenstance, over the TV, and saw
Encyclopedia.
encyclopedia, thank you. And I said, oh, there's my answer. So I looked up the name Adams, and I made my introduction speech based upon the findings from that encyclopedia under the name of Adams, starting with the founders of this country. That was to be my introduction. And so at Kiwanis, I stood up and it turned out to be a speech. And I don't know if I had notes or not, but here Kenneth was sitting beside me, and I was standing, giving introductions of all these Adamses. Some of them, I said, were bartenders. Some ran saloons. Some were thieves. Some were robbers. Some were working men. All Adams. And everybody began to laugh. And they hooted and hollered this introduction. I guess I should have had a badge for the longest introduction. It probably took 15 minutes to get this whole string of Adamses out of my system. And Kenneth was laughing so much he fell out of his chair. Kenneth Adams, the youngest son of Boots. So that time in the kitchen, that evening in the kitchen, we were having dinner, and the kids were gathered around. I think they were all here at that time. And the telephone rang, and Priscilla answered it, and she said, "It's for you." I said, "I'll take it in the bedroom so you guys can keep eating." And I go in and say, "This is Lou Bear," or hello or something. He said, "Lou, this is Boots." I knew who Boots was. And I said, "You're kidding me." He says, "No, this is Boots Adams. I want to give you thanks. We're sitting having our dinner, and I guess you are too. I won't hold you long. But Ken is telling us about your introduction today at Kiwanis. What a grand and glorious thing to have that you have done for our family." This is Boots Adams talking. I'm saying to my mind, this is Boots Adams talking. And so I said, "Okay, thank you very much. Appreciate your call," and hung up. And I said, "I wonder who that was." And I thought, I've since forgotten the guy's name. I know who played that joke on me, one of my friends. So I came back to the table and sat down, and all the kids said, "Dad, who was that?" I said, "That was Boots Adams," he said. And every one of them said, "Oh, come on. Why would Boots Adams call you?" But I said, "Well, that's who he said he was." And so I told them the story of the introduction. So next day, let's see, that must have been a Wednesday. So next day, a Thursday, I visited the Thornbury. That was the guy that I thought he was a jokester, head of the athletics in Phillips Petroleum Company. I went in and accused him of having called me and pretended that he was Boots Adams. He grew white in the face. He says, "Listen, little bear, any time in this town anybody calls and says he's Boots Adams, he's gonna be Boots Adams. It wasn't I who made that call." And that's the first time I really knew who it was. Interesting story. So you asked the question, did I ever meet him? Yes, I had.
So Phillips had an athletics director?
Well, yeah, because they built the Adams building and equipped it with a full-sized gymnasium floor because they were sponsoring the Adams basketball, the Phillips 66 basketball team. World champions eventually. The only place those guys had to play and to practice was in College High, the gymnasium there. And being in a proper level, they were able to get permission to have the team work out there. And so the building was built to accommodate them. And then if the offices were needed, well, that would be thrown in too. So the Adams building was built for that reason. The Adams building also had other uses for company meetings and town meetings. It was used for that purpose. But it was a full-fledged gymnasium in which the Phillips 66ers played their national games when they were here in town. As I said, they became the national champions and I guess the athletic champions too. And Thornbury was running this sort of enterprise. And the company was supporting it. It was good advertising. It was a blow to the town when the Phillips company shut down the Phillips 66ers. I think it was probably economic, or it may have been pressure for having employees pay amateur ball game, because I think they began to see that maybe this wasn't quite right. They being the competitors as well as the Phillips company, which is probably it was a right decision. But it was a great time for the town, a great time for those basketball players. Many of them, most of them, rose to high positions in the company, not because they were super basketball players, but because they could make decisions like that. Athletics make decisions.
Did you ever play sports?
In high school,
That's cool.
football. And I was manager of the basketball team. At that time they had student managers. Football. I was 135-pound guard. I was a guard playing besides the center, trying to take down 180, 190-pound tackles, guards on the opposing team who had all come from the farm, were husky guys. I was city bred. They could toss me around as they chose. Something. Oh, and I was playing against the tackle next to me was Arnold Kepke. Why, I just suddenly remember that name. A student with me, Arnold Kepke. He was a Catholic, so I knew him through the church too. But he pointed out to me my first game. He says, "You see that guy over there? A big tackle from a team, I think was Hearst." He says he's going to throw you as hard as he can. He's going to cut you up, so be ready for him. And by gore, Arnold Kepke was right. That tackle threw me down, broke my nose, bloodied it, and made me madder than hell. So I said to myself, the next play, he's going to get it. And by glory, 135-pound guard threw him on his tail as hard as could be done, and down he fell. Well, I had to get that out of my system. It was a good experience. One other time, against an equally big team, one of the opposite players happened to step on my little finger, and he picked me up. He said, "Gee, I'm sorry, little boy. I didn't mean to do that." Man, talk about putting a kid in his place. I became the captain of that team. Lost a game that we shouldn't have lost. We played on a field against a bigger team, a bigger school called Braddock, after General Braddock in the Pittsburgh area. Unfortunately, they were playing on a field which had no grass. And so some bright guy thought that the way to handle that field was to put down sawdust. Unfortunately, he didn't anticipate that the weather does rather peculiar things in that area. It rained and then it froze. So sawdust became knives, all of them. And we had to play on a field with icicles, which cut us off. Both teams up. That was the game that we should have won. I couldn't get the team. They were worn out. I couldn't get the team to. We were close. A big team. Well, anyway, so much for that football. Oh, I wanted to tell you, the star. Yeah, this I hope is interesting. The star on that team was a halfback. At that time, we called them halfbacks, whatever they call them now. And he was the touchdown maker. I was the guard in the line. I was the grunt. We were to run opposition for him so he could get through. Now it happened that he was a black kid. He was my best friend, a black kid. He was the vice president of the class. I was the president. He was the star of the team. I was the grunt. He got the cheers and the plaudits. I just got nice job there. So we grew real close. His name was Lexi Carter. I've eaten meals at his house. He was, I don't know if I've said this, he was among the Negroes. George Westinghouse, that I brought Negroes to be janitors. Did I say that? Well, in order to get the janitorial work done in the factories that he was building, he brought in a bunch of, from some source, a bunch of Negroes, and I got acquainted through the school, and then through the school, and then through the school, because a lot of them became champion players. All of them were good football players. They were fast. They had that in their nature, and the American whites are a little bit slower. Anyway, I became well acquainted with Negroes and with their life, a Yankee. And then I go to Rebel Land, which had at that time Negroes in a different situation, sort of a caste situation, of which my in-laws participated, and which Priscilla, my wife, also participated, because these were the handymen, these were the laborers, these were the garbage collectors, these were the guys you called upon to get jobs done you couldn't get anybody else to do. You gave them work. There was a good relationship among the blacks and the whites in Fort Worth. I had already been exposed through my good friend Lexi Carter back east, so I knew how to behave. I don't know if I was leading up to something now or not. Next question.
Well, that was an issue here in Bartlesville for a while, wasn't it? Racial?
Oh, well. Oh, you want to get on the Ruth Brown subject. I need to tell you, don't be carried away by any part you think I may have had in that, because mine was strictly, I think, best described as an observer. I was not a participant per se. I did attend some of the meetings. What I'm talking about is that Bartlesville at that time was segregated. I guess I can say we had schools on the west side for the blacks, and we had schools on the east side for the whites. On the west side, we would meet, particularly the white wives, would meet with the black folk and see what help we could give them in getting adjusted, and I think that's the proper word, to white man's ways. They ran their own school. We met the principal and the teachers. We met the mothers and the dads. They were fine people. And that part of Bartlesville's history has never been described that I'm aware of the black perspective of that segregation that I'm going to tell you about. It was never described, and it should be, somehow or other. because they have, excuse me, they have a point of view which has not been expressed, is not known, not understood, and not recognized. And maybe what I say will help a little bit. Let's see. I got to know some fine people. They were segregated. They did not participate in white affairs except as the help, as a maid, as they were needed, which should not be frowned on. That gave them work, good work, in surroundings which they would never have seen otherwise, which was a help to them, a help to the whites, of course. But we had a white person, of course, running the public library, which was in a building which has since been torn down and replaced by, gee, I don't know, what's down there?
A new library building.
Oh, now, of course, thank you. A new, my librarian daughter will know, a new library building. Anyway, Ruth Brown, a city employee, white, was the librarian and ran that library. And it was predominantly for white kids. After all, the blacks had their library in their school west of town. Why should we have a library for them? But Ruth Brown was a different person. I don't know where she came from. She thought that the blacks should have some of the privileges. And so she did the unknown thing of having a black girl in the library and borrowing a book. Now it turned out the book, I think the book was something about Karl Marx. I don't know. But this was enough to inflame the town. A communist in the hands of a black person? Well, anyway, that fractured things here and cost Ruth Brown her job. She was pilloried. She was condemned. She also had some black kids in the Rexall drugstore who had a lunch counter, and she bought them a lunch. A black kid sitting in a white restaurant? Holy smokes, we can't have that. So the town, I guess, grew up in arms, except for the group that was working with the blacks to try to help them in their endeavors. And so, well, bad things went to worse. And I guess the situation got bad enough that Ruth Brown was called before the city council and fired. And there were 4 of us who were doing things similar to what I was doing with the black folk and their wives. And we 4 were given 4 or 5 were given special handling. People say, which I think is wrong, people say that I was sent to Waco and what then became the rocket fuels plant because of my actions with the blacks here. I don't think that's correct. I don't think the company did that because I had a chance to ask for that opportunity. I was accepted and I went down to Waco as the chief process engineer for this new plant. What an opportunity. One of the other guys, of this 5 I guess, was sent out to West Texas. Another one was sent to Belgium in patent work. There was another, and I don't know what happened to him, but the last one had a fairly high position in research and development in Phillips Petroleum Company, and rumor tells me, so I'm told, that he was called in by the vice president of R&D and advised that he should drop his work and his association with the blacks, should divorce himself from it completely because it was just not the proper thing to do. He did. The rest of us went out of town. took new jobs. He stayed here, which is okay. A company, nobody was that I know of was mad at him or mad at the company for saving his job. He was a valuable employee. Anyway, a friend of mine, years later, after I had come back from Waco and was re-employed by Phillips, and then I took retirement, or was given retirement, that's better. I was attending a meeting at St. James, or other Catholic church, and a lot of East Siders were there, and my friend, I almost mentioned his name, was, I guess, running the meeting, and he had a position with Phillips that was in the company personnel department. So I presume he knew a lot of the background of what I'm talking about relative to company employees. And he had the temerity to announce publicly that, to everybody know, that I was one of the 4 or 5 that was sent out of town by Phillips Petroleum Company because of my actions with the black folk. That I don't think is correct. I asked him, how in the heck did he know that? He says, well, that's his position. He knew all that stuff from his personnel work. It was too late. It was already said. That did the company, I think, a disservice. But you may say that they did a disservice to the 3 or 4 guys they sent away. Well, maybe. Some things have to be done. Next question. Where do we go from here?
I was trying to figure out the time period. Was that in the 60s? In the 50s or 60s?
1950.
50.
1950 is when she was terminated.
They were here from 1949 to 1952.
Okay.
So it was during that period.
Yeah.
Okay.
And yeah, she was terminated in 1950.
Shall I, Amy,
Yes.
shall I say anything about my termination?
It's up to you. If you want to talk about the...
Well, it's, to some people, it's a hard spot for them. It's not for me. Anyway,
Obviously it wasn't, because you then got 4 kids through college after that.
well, by hook or crook.
Exactly. By hook or by crook.
That's right.
That's the part I've always been amazed at.
Anyway, let's see. Termination, Phillips. I came back from Waco after all this that I've already told you. And let's say I became surplus, which is probably true in many ways, because there also was a cutback. But I had a job out of Waco in the rocket fuels plant of being the last man on the totem pole to get official secret documents signed by the manager, which represented proposals for new contracts, which was our lifeblood, new contracts from the Air Force in Washington. And my job was the last man on the totem pole to pull this contract proposal, all the money figures and the designs, the mechanical designs of the rockets that we proposed into a compact message that would make a contract. And then on a Sunday morning, this was Saturday work. On Sunday morning, my job became of getting his signature on this document. Otherwise, it wasn't official. So I had to go to his home on a Sunday morning before he went to his church, and someplace either before or after my church, before I went to Mass, to get his signature. We never discussed an item. I interrupted his day. I hated it. He probably hated it too. I hated disturbing him. I should have objected. I didn't. I should have. Anyway, my job then was on Sunday morning taking that document, secret, out to Waco, a distance of something like 30 miles, in my car, and giving it to the postmaster to take as a secret document, because he had been checked out, to get into the mails so it could get to Washington by special delivery the next day, Monday. What a burden. Anyway, this was an annoyance to this gentleman. And then there were a couple other events that happened too in my new assignment when I came back up here, which irritated him, I'm sure. So I'm sure we had more than one falling out. So the time came for cutbacks in R&D, and I was now a low man again on the totem pole, and see the scene. I was one guy sitting in front of the desk of the director of research, surrounded by all of the supervisors, I guess. Why they were there, I don't know. One or two of them had supervised me, and I was given my walking papers. I was astounded. I was dumbfounded. I was so shocked, I didn't even have nerve or gumption enough or sense enough to ask why and make him spell it out. So I don't know today. I'm claiming it was termination because they were cutting back, and I was the man they couldn't find a price for. They had to save the money. Anyway, people think that's a sore point with me. It is, to the point that I don't understand. But it's not a sore point with me. It must be to other people who heard it. Anyway, that's my termination.
That was in 1970, just to give you a frame of reference.
1970.
1970,
Yeah,
because it was when I went to college.
yeah. I had been with the company at 55, 1970.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
that was the time by the policy that I could be terminated with retirement and some other benefits. The retirement is so small. I hadn't been there long in the program, and I hadn't been paid enough money to make a retirement program of much worth. Anyway, I left the company and then went into selling linens. Yeah, did I mention that?
Uh-huh.
Okay,
And real estate.
in real estate, and then
And you maintained a happy house through all of that.
right. Thank you. It was a happy house, in spite of it all. Next question.
Well, you mentioned church and going to church. How important was that in your family growing up?
Very important. Every Sunday we made it. Every kid went to church on Sunday. They attended what we then had poor catechism classes, very poorly done. That was before the church got organized in the parishes and in the dioceses to put on a proper education program. I think they do it better now.
You still go today?
Too old. I can't hear what they're saying.
You go to church
Oh, I go to church, yeah.
Every week.
every week.
Well, every week. But before I got disabled, twice a week. 3 times a week. Twice on Sunday.
Wednesday, Saturday,
Yeah.
and Sunday is when you go.
These days, how early do you get up?
Well, at 12, 2, 4, 6, and 8.
And 8 for the day.
Well, 7 or 8, yeah, for the day. But I try to get 2 naps in.
And they.
I didn't have one this morning, but I'm looking forward to one this afternoon.
And how long is a nap?
About an hour.
And then you go to bed at what time tonight?
Oh, it varies. 7:30 to 11:30, sometimes midnight.
And what do you do in between?
Watch the TV, read the paper, the headlines. I can't read the substance anymore. And talk to whoever's here. And gab.
And you do physical therapy.
Oh yeah, and see doctors. And get my toenails trimmed and get haircuts. It's a mess. Boy.
Well, when you were a youngster, what would you do for fun?
We played in the street. Not done much anymore. We played ball and we played, I've forgotten the name of the game, with a stick. The neighbors, unfortunately, across the street didn't like the fact that we were playing ball and the ball would get in their yard. Our yard was up a terrace and the ball didn't affect us. But that was a bad situation. They complained. But we enjoyed our game. And the neighbor kids, well, a lot of kids joined in. Let's see, that's one thing. We built the backyard from the chicken coop. I said we had chickens. And a rooster, Paul's rooster, we built a roller coaster on boards as we could find them from a crabapple tree at the very back of the yard, cleared down the yard, beside of the house, down. I don't know if, remember now, if we went down the terrace to the street. I suspect we probably did. And our carriage that we rode was a mere slab of wood with two runners on it, and we used bacon grease to grease both it, the thing we rode, as well as the slide, which had a lath. Do they use lath these days? Lath in the center of the board, which was the track, and then the carriage would have two pieces of lath to keep it in like a trolley car. That was fun, and the neighbors all would crowd around. My family has always been one with neighbor kids running everywhere. I don't know why we put up with them. But as Abby said, this is a happy home. So that was a game. And it was thrilling because it was really speedy going down that track. Sometimes we'd fall off the rider and get bruised, but happy to get back on. Let's see.
Were you ever in Boy Scouts as a kid?
Oh,
too?
yeah.
It sounds like.
Yeah. Let me tell you, at a very early age, my oldest brother, AB, what's the difference age between Cubby and me about?
3 or 4 years.
Oh, more than that.
Cubby and you?
Yeah. There was Ralph in there.
No, you're right, because there was Ralph. Tell your story and I'll look it up.
Okay. Anyway, he was a member of the Boy Scouts as soon as he could, and he used a handbook.
4 years.
4 years. Okay. So for 4 years of looking at his handbook and going through it endlessly, I just couldn't turn it down. I read all about the Boy Scouts and couldn't wait for the time of 12, at that time it's now 11, to join. I had to be a tenderfoot. Boy, it was great. I can't right now recall some of the names that we used to talk about. Anyway, when I was 11, I wasn't admitted to the Boy Scouts, but my oldest brother was helping run the troop Dad was a commissioner or something, helping run the troop and other troops. And so I had certain privileges, and I came to the scout meetings and participated as if I were a tenderfoot, and I wasn't, because I wasn't yet old enough. But I became a tenderfoot at the time that I passed the age, in August of whatever year that would be. I made Eagle Scout. On the coffee table is that wood carving I made during that time of the first class badge. I was impressed with the meaning of that badge and of the things that it meant, of pride and loyalty and the whole Scout law.
He signed it too.
Yeah.
We lived that more than we did the Ten Commandments. By that I mean in a loud, awkward way. We were talking about the Boy Scout law, knowing that it was really much the meaning of the Ten Commandments, which we were getting in church. Yes, I was a Boy Scout. That we didn't have the Cubs at the time. But I passed the merit badges. I don't know how many I earned.
I assume you went to camps and.
Oh yeah,
those things.
I want to tell you one incident of camp. But I became an Eagle Scout. I made the grades for that. But at camp, I told you that my best friend, the vice president of the class, high school class, was Lexi Carter, a Negro, a black kid. And we took, we, as a troop, he had become a scout also and made Eagle, but had joined the troop with my older brother Cubby Bear, Robert Bear. So we filed application to take the troop to camp, or they did, the leaders did. And I don't know what year this was, it was denied. We couldn't go to camp with a black kid. Now this was in a part of the Pittsburgh environs, not Pittsburgh itself, but in the outlying little towns. We couldn't go to camp because we couldn't have a Negro. And so Cubby, my eldest brother, and Dad said, well, I guess we don't go to camp. If we can't take Lexi Carter, we're not going to hear a camp. And so that's the way the word was delivered to Scout headquarters, at which time the rule was changed, and we took Lexi Carter to camp. Now, mind you, this was a likable kid. Excuse me. He was funny. He was one of the end men when we had minstrel shows, and he blacked up like the rest of us. But he was full of happiness and joy. And on the Tuesday of the camp week, the camp kids had an election to pick the most popular kid in the camp, and who won but Lexi Carter, and got the badge. The only black kid in the camp. And somebody, I remember this, I don't remember who, some leader asked me if I was going to go swimming. And I said, oh no. And he said, why not? I said, Lexi Carter is going swimming, and I don't want that stuff to rub off on me. That was the limit of my knowledge. I was straightened out. Don't you frown. That's the way it was in those days. Now, I went to camp. We during holidays in particular, during the winter, we would go to a camp of our own. Did I tell you that my uncle was district forester? Oh, well, Pennsylvania was divided into two district forests. Pennsylvania is really a forested and mountainous state, the east and the west. He was responsible for the west half of the forest and waters of the west half of the state. So, yeah, this is important. So, among his endeavors, he established what then became the CCC under FDR, the Civilian Concentration, no,
Conservation.
Conversation, not concentration, the Civilian darn it, conversation,
Conservation.
conservation, thank you. See what happens when you get older, you guys? Anyway, and they built at the Pennsylvania state expense a series of cabins up in the mountains and would rent them out on weekends or anytime anybody wanted to use them for parties to come up, not a party, but groups to come up and enjoy the mountains. And we participated in that frequently, many a weekend in the winter, snow and ice on the ground. We would go to the Allegheny Mountains and stay in one of those cabins. Among the other things that the Civilian Conservation Corps did was to, yeah, thank you, was to rebuild some of the streams, build dams, build parks, build these cabins or these shacks, and otherwise make the forest habitable for people that didn't have that experience. It was a great endeavor. This was at Pennsylvania expense. Later on, whatever expense there was, later on, the President Roosevelt, took it over, and that's when it became the CCC under the federal auspices, and they granted beaucoup money and helped a lot of young kids. It was for boys only. I don't think girls participated. And young youth, maybe up to 20 or 21. It helped them a lot. Taught them things from the cities that they would never have learned any other way. Woodmanship, craftsmanship, fire building, outdoor cooking, indoor cooking, games, fellowship, the whole smear. They were a lucky crowd. So were we. We participated with them.
What was that uncle's name?
Oh, Valentino.
Valentine.
Valentine, okay.
Valentine.
Well, I was given the Italian version. Valentine. My family had peculiar names. Valentine, district forester. He lived in the city called Ligonier, which is close to, I'll think of it in a minute, where St. Vincent's College is located.
Latrobe. Is that
Right.
Latrobe?
Where Arnold Palmer grew up,
Latrobe.
went to college there, played golf there, and made his record in Altoona. I never met him. But on weekends when we'd go up to visit the folks in Ligonier, we would always go through the town and think of Arnold Palmer. Nobody in my family then was a golfer, but now I think I have golfers. And Tom. Well, anyway.
Well, did you ever think you'd make it to 100?
No, I never thought about it.
How did you celebrate?
My thoughts of making it 100 was I live my time out, and I die when it's time, and the date has been already set. I just don't know what it is. How
did you celebrate your birthday?
Oh, Annabeth could tell you more than I. That was the day
Oh, you fell. All right.
I had my fall and was incapacitated, broke my back and didn't know it, but it hurt. It hurt. And the house, we had, 60 people here or
60,
something?
yeah, 55 or 60 people.
Well, crowded. And here I was the host, more or less. I knew better, but I like to say that. Did I take a nap that day?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That was the whole reason to have it here, was so you could go nap when you
Yeah.
wanted to.
My organizer daughter. How did we celebrate? Well, you can see the vestiges of it. That stuff and stuff in the den. Take a look at it if you want. It tells more of my life than I knew existed.
You have, I think we were told you have a very interesting first memory. I don't think we've captured that.
Oh, yeah.
I had what?
What's your earliest memory of your life?
It wasn't the, I may be confused, it was probably the Armistice Day Parade, 1918.
Yeah. That's what you've always said was your
Okay.
earliest.
I remember we lived in a different house then. I remember Dad hoisted me up on the windowsill, and I stood in the windowsill on the front room, watched the parade go by, and they were carrying the effigy of Kaiser Wilhelm. And much later in life, I woke up to the fact that he too was a Catholic. And I couldn't put that together. But he had subordinates who were really running the country and running the war. And so I don't hold him responsible. I think he was powerless. That's the structure of those countries at that time. Although Americans hated him. They really did. But anyway, the parade went down the street, 6th Street, and the effigy was in front. They took it down to the ballpark and had a great time burning it up. I think that was my first memory. And that had to be in November or December, because Armistice Day is November the 11th. My second early memory is probably 2 or 3 fold. Now summertime. Oh yeah. And summertime, as the son of German folk, we scrubbed the place down. We scrubbed the front porch. We scrubbed the sidewalk on the side. We scrubbed the steps down to the city sidewalk. We scrubbed the city-owned sidewalk. And probably we would have scrubbed the street if we had thought about it, but thank goodness we didn't. But we scrubbed that much. We made it spick and span. The house shone like a diamond. So one time I'm out there, pretty young kid, helping mother hose down the walk and doing the scrubbing, learning how to do the job eventually. And I spied out in the middle of the street. Oh, this was the day before we had much fuel-driven automobiles, much horse-driven carriages, including the hucksters and so forth. And they, of course, patrolled on the street. But out there in the street, I saw a wad of used chewing gum. And I said, it's going to go to waste. So I dashed out there, got it, and popped it in my mouth and started chewing. Mother saw this event, and she got me and she shook the living lights out of me. How dare you chew somebody else's chewing gum? Take that stuff out of your mouth. That's what I remember. And I quickly spit it out. About that same time, I think I fell off the curb or off the front wall and hurt myself and probably passed out a little bit. And now Mother was a different mother. Now she was the Jewish mother. She come out and said, "Oh, Louis, say you're not dead. Wake up, my darling. I love you so much. Don't die in my hand." And then when I came to, "You nasty kid." As far as I know, we don't have much Jewish blood. I wish we had more. Let's see.
You were just thinking, waste not, want not.
Sir?
You were just thinking with the bubble gum, waste not, want not.
That's right. That's right. I've never picked up a piece of chewing gum since. I learned my lesson. Did I answer that properly?
Well, what I want to know is, when history is written, what would you like it to say about you? How do you want to be remembered?
I lived my life.
In a happy house.
Oh, in a happy house. Yeah, thank you. Both where I was born at a home. In those days, we didn't go to the hospital. And I had diphtheria at an early age. And I was in a crib at an early age in Mother and Dad's room. And I had, when you go out of your mind and have visions, delirium. I had delirium. I don't remember what I dreamed, but I had delirium. I remember that so much. In fact, I guess I almost passed away. That's the last time I had diphtheria. Since then, we've had antitoxins. I guess everybody gets them now. Dad had a revolver in that room. A gun-carrying Catholic? You bet. And on occasion, when we'd go up to one of the farms where his brothers lived, he would take that pistol along and have some target practice in the smokehouse. I never shot that pistol that I know of, but that was a huge amount of fun to hear that pistol go off as Dad was shooting at the smokehouse at a target he had hung on the wall. That brings back one other memory. When I was at ROTC at the University of Pittsburgh, we went to Fort Monroe in Virginia for 6 weeks of camp training. And some of the training, of course, is marching and close, forgotten the words we used. Anyway, we were taught how to shoot guns. And so I don't remember that we ever shot a mortar. The mortars those days were this big. I don't think they're used anymore. They shoot up high and intended to clear all obstructions and land on the enemy. But we did shoot 16-inch rifles, cannon. I found myself, shall I go on? I found myself being assigned, because people thought I was so smart, I guess, what they call me, chief, I'll think of it in a minute, where my job was to but supervise the guys who used a ramrod to ram the powder, the shot in first, 16-inch diameter, and then back it up with 4 or 5 bags of powder, packed in tightly, as hard as they could ram it in. This was World War I munitions, by the way. We were still using those supplies. And then my job, I was chief of breach. My job then, but before they put the powder in, I had to inspect the cannon to be sure that there was no smoldering after a shot, after the previous shot, that would ignite the powder, because they swabbed it down also with a dab of water. You can imagine what that inspection was like, a quick look, ye gods. And then, as chief of breach, I had to lock the thing, close the breech and lock it, and then out of a pouch take much like a rifle shell, an igniter about that long, and insert it in the hole in the breech, because that was to be the firing mechanism, attach the lanyard and step back, and when all is ready, when the azimuth spotters gave the signal that they had the target in sight and the gun was properly pointed, they would give the command to fire, and I would yank the thing and yell, "Fire!" The gun now was elevated. These were disappearing guns, because the recoil brought the gun back down to its hidden position, at which time we would open up the breech, swab it out, load it again, and get ready for the next shot. Now the target was a raft being towed by a small vessel, I guess maybe a mile apart. I never knew. But we often wondered if we miscalculated or set the rifle wrong, what would happen to those guys? I never knew. It never happened. But boy, oh boy, those were the days. Fire. Chief of Breach. Boy, next.
Nope. I think we're about done.
Okay.
I think you need a break.
There's much more we haven't covered. You'll have to come back if you're interested.
I am. Thank you for sharing today.
You're quite welcome.